glasses perched on the end of his nose as glasses perched on the end of his nose as he meticulously reviewed the final proof of the coronation ceremony program. It was past 11 at night, and the rest of the household had long since retired. The weight of the upcoming historic day pressed down on his shoulders. But it was a pleasant burden, the culmination of a lifetime of waiting. Every hymn, every prayer, every ancient ritual had been checked and double-checked. The king was a perfectionist by nature, and this document, which would be read by millions across the globe, had to be flawless. His private secretary, a patient man named Sir Clive, had left the folder on the desk with a handwritten note attached. "Your Majesty, the final draft as requested. The Archbishop's office has signed off, and then the palace press team is waiting for your approval to send to the printers by 8 a.m. Charles poured himself a glass of Highland spring water and began to read. The frontispiece was suitably grand, featuring the royal coat of arms. He turned the thick, vellum-like pages slowly. The order of service was perfect. The musical selections were sublime. He smiled slightly at the mention of the new composition, written especially for the occasion by a Welsh composer he admired. And then he reached the page listing the participants in the procession. It was a long and complex hierarchical list: prime ministers, Commonwealth leaders, foreign royalty, and then the extended British royal family. His finger traced down the names. His sister, the Princess Royal, would have a prominent role, as she always did, as part of the sovereign's bodyguard. His eyes moved to the section detailing the order of those who would walk before the king and queen, and a section he had skimmed over in previous briefings, trusting his staff to get it right. He stopped. He read the line again, then a third time. His finger rested on the name of his wife's party. It read, "The ladies and gentlemen attending Her Majesty the Queen." Below it, in a neat alphabetical list, were the names of Camilla's adult children, Tom Parker Bowles and Laura Lopes. That was correct. They were to have a place of honor, that walking directly before the Queen as a mark of the king's love for his blended family. But his eyes narrowed. He scanned the list for another name. He looked for the ladies-in-waiting. He looked for the supporters of the Queen, a role usually filled by close friends or family. Something was missing. His sister's name was not there, not as a participant in the Queen's procession, and not in any other capacity of personal support to the Queen. Anne, the Princess Royal, the only daughter of the late Queen Elizabeth II, the woman who had worked harder than any other royal for the institution, was listed only in her official state capacity earlier in the ceremony. There was no mention of her in relation to the new Queen. Charles took off his glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose. He knew Camilla and Anne were not close. He knew the history, the tangled web of love and betrayal that stretched back to the early 1970s. But this was different. This was the coronation. This was about family unity. He had specifically, or so he thought, requested that Anne be given a place of personal honor beside Camilla. He wanted to send a message to the world that the old wounds had healed, that the family was united behind their new king and queen. He remembered discussing it with Camilla months ago, a vague conversation about including family. A cold dread began to creep up his spine. He pulled the original draft, and the one his office had sent to Camilla's private secretary for review and amendment weeks ago, from the bottom of the folder. He compared it to this final proof. The original draft listed, "The Princess Royal will form part of the Queen's procession." It was right there, in black and white. In this new version, the line was gone, stricken out. His hand trembled slightly as he picked up the phone on the desk. It was a direct line to the private secretary. Sir Clive answered on the second ring, in his voice alert despite the late hour. "Sir?" Clive. The king's voice was low, controlled, but with an edge that made his secretary sit up straight in his bed. "The final proof of the program. The list for the Queen's procession. It has been changed." There was a pause. Yes, Your Majesty. The final version incorporates all the amendments requested by the Queen's office. The Queen's office, Charles repeated, the words tasting like ash in his mouth. They requested the removal of the Princess Royal. I believe the instruction came directly from the Queen's private secretary, sir. It was marked as a personal request from Her Majesty. I assumed it had been discussed with you. Charles didn't answer. He stared at the name Anne on the old draft, and the empty space where it should be on the new one. He thought of his sister. He thought of his wife. The program was supposed to be a symbol of harmony. But looking at it now, it felt like a declaration of war. He hung up the phone without another word, his fury building not as a sudden explosion, but as a deep, cold, tidal wave of rage that would have to wait until morning to break. The silence of the room was now deafening. The morning light streamed through the windows of the sitting room where Queen Camilla was enjoying a quiet breakfast. She was in a silk robe, reading a novel, deliberately avoiding the pile of correspondence that required her attention. The door opened, but she did not look up, assuming it was a footman with more tea. "Camilla?" The sharpness of his voice made her freeze. She looked up to see her husband standing in the doorway. He was dressed in a tweed jacket, as if he were about to go for a walk, but his face was pale with anger. In his hand, he held the rolled-up proof of the program. "Darling, you look terrible. Did you not sleep?" she asked, her voice carefully casual. He walked into the room and unrolled the document on the table in front of her, smoothing it flat beside her plate of toast. "I need you to explain this." Camilla glanced down at the page. She knew exactly what it was. She took a slow sip of her tea, buying time. "It's the final program. It looks lovely. The typeface is very elegant." "Don't," Charles said, his voice tight. "Don't play games with me. Where is Anne's name?" Camilla looked at the page with theatrical innocence. "Anne? She's listed earlier in the state procession. She's the Captain General of the Royal Marines. I believe she has a very important part to play." "You know what I mean," Charles insisted, his finger stabbing the paper. "In the Queen's procession. In your procession. We discussed this. I wanted her to be there. With you. With the family." A flicker of something hard crossed Camilla's face. She placed her teacup back in its saucer with a delicate clink. "You discussed it, Charles. You discussed a vague notion of family unity. I discussed it with my team, and we made a decision based on what is best for the ceremony." "Best for the ceremony?" Charles was incredulous. "How can excluding my sister possibly be best?" Camilla finally met his gaze. Her eyes were cool and clear. "Because this is my moment, Charles. Ours. And I will not have it shadowed by someone who has made it perfectly clear for decades that she despises me. Having Anne hover behind me, looking like she'd rather be anywhere else, would not project unity. It would project tension. The press would have a field day analyzing her every frown." "This isn't about the press," Charles shouted, then caught himself, lowering his voice to a fierce whisper. "This is about my family. She is my sister, the only sister I have. And whatever history exists between you two, she is a part of this family, and I wanted her to be a part of this." Camilla stood up, and pulling her robe tighter around her. "The history between us is exactly the point. She had an affair with my husband, with Andrew. She was seeing him while I was supposed to be marrying him. Do you think I have forgotten that? Do you think I have forgotten the humiliation? The gossip?" Charles looked at her, stunned. "That was 50 years ago? And you? You and I were seeing each other then, too. It was a different world. We were all young. Anne and Andrew were friends. It was a long time ago. To bow. Professional is not the same as to bow. Professional is not the same as respectful. I will not have her front and center at my coronation. pretending to support me when everyone in that abbey will remember the stories. They'll remember that she loved the man I married first. Look to Anne? She will see the program. Look to Anne. She will see the program. She will see that her brother's wife struck her name out. It will wound her deeply. And what about my wounds, Charles? Camilla's voice rose for the first time. I have spent my entire life being carved up by this family and the press. I was the other woman. I was the Rottweiler. I have been vilified, mocked, and hated. I have earned this place, and I will not spend the most important day of my life pandering to a woman who has never given me the time of day. The decision is made. It's final. The king stared at his wife as if seeing her for the first time. There was a steel in her he had always admired, but now it was directed at him, at his family. The argument had only just begun, and already the walls of the room felt like they were closing in. The news, as it always does in palaces, traveled through whispers. A private secretary here, a lady-in-waiting there. Within 48 hours, the story of the altered program had seeped through the gilded corridors of Buckingham Palace and reached the country estate of Gatcombe Park, where Princess Anne lived a life as far from the courtly intrigue as she could manage. Anne was in her stable yard, mucking out a stall herself. I pulled back with a simple clip. She took the printed email, read it, and handed it back without a flicker of emotion crossing her face. I see, was all she said. She finished mucking out the stall. She checked on a sick foal. She spoke to her head groom about feed deliveries. Only then, when she was alone in the Land Rover driving back to the main house, did she allow herself to process the information. Her brother's wife, the woman she had known for over 5 decades, the woman who had been the cause of so much family turmoil, had deliberately and publicly erased her from the narrative. Anne pulled the Land Rover over to the side of the muddy track and sat for a moment, staring out at the gray Gloucestershire sky. The history between them was complicated. She couldn't deny it. And in the early 70s, she had been young, headstrong, and utterly captivated by the dashing Andrew Parker Bowles. He was a Catholic, a charismatic officer, completely unsuitable, and thrillingly dangerous. She had known he was seeing Camilla, then Camilla Shand. She hadn't cared. It was a competition, and Anne was not used to losing. When Andrew had ultimately chosen Camilla, marrying her in 1973, Anne had been hurt, though she would never admit it. She had thrown herself into her engagement to Mark Phillips, a marriage that would prove to be a disaster. And through it all, Andrew had remained a fixture in her life, a dear friend, a fellow horse enthusiast, the godfather to her daughter, Zara. The bond had never truly broken, even when the Camillagate tapes exploded in the 90s, revealing Charles and Camilla's affair, even when Andrew and Camilla divorced. To Anne, the situation was simple. Andrew Parker Bowles was her friend. And he always had been. The fact that he was also Camilla's ex-husband was a detail, not a defining characteristic, but to Camilla, it seemed, it was the defining characteristic. Anne's continued friendship with Andrew was a persistent, nagging reminder of the past, a past where she had not been the sole object of his affection. Sitting in the cold Land Rover, Anne felt a familiar, steely resolve settle over her. She was not a woman given to public displays of emotion or to fiery confrontations. Or she was known for her dry wit and her legendary work ethic, not for tantrums. But this was a calculated snub, and it was aimed directly at her. It wasn't just about the coronation ceremony. It was about erasing her from her brother's life, from the family's history. She started the engine and drove on. She would not call Charles. She would not rage at Camilla. That was not her way. She would wait. She would attend the coronation, of course. She would do her duty, as she always had. She would walk in the state procession, she would sit in her assigned seat, and she would watch as the woman who had cut her